somewhere right now. Someone is lying awake, trying to figure out what they did wrong. Things were going well, maybe better than well. There was a weekend that felt like the beginning of something real, a conversation that went further than either of you expected, a version of closeness that felt earned rather than easy. And then, almost on cue, the other person disappeared. Not completely, not dramatically, just enough. Slower replies, shorter sentences, a strange formality creeping back into something that had just started to feel unguarded. And the person left behind does what almost everyone does in that position. They comb back through every text, every moment, every word, looking for the mistake. What did I say? What did I do? Where did I push too hard? Here's what I want you to sit with before we go any further. In an enormous number of cases, there was no mistake. What you are looking at is not a response to something you did wrong. It is a response to something going right. And understanding that distinction is going to change how you interpret nearly every confusing relationship pattern you've ever experienced. This is one of the most well-documented and most consistently misunderstood dynamics in adult attachment. And it goes by a name that sounds almost too clean for something this painful: the Intimacy-Withdrawal Cycle. It shows up constantly in avoidantly attached people, and avoidant attachment is far more common than most people assume. Showing up in a significant portion of the adult population across genders, though it gets discussed disproportionately in the context of men because of how differently boys and girls are socialized around emotional expression. The mechanism itself, though, has nothing to do with gender. It has to do with how a nervous system was built to handle closeness during the years when that system was still forming. Let's go back to where this actually starts, because you cannot understand the adult behavior without understanding the origin. Avoidant attachment typically develops in early childhood in relationships with caregivers who were not abusive or absent in any dramatic sense, but who were inconsistently emotionally available. A parent who met physical needs reliably but responded to emotional needs, crying, seeking comfort, wanting closeness, with subtle discomfort, dismissal, or redirection, not cruelty. Often just a caregiver who was themselves never taught how to sit with a child's big feelings without feeling overwhelmed by them. The child in that environment learned something extremely efficient and extremely costly at the same time. They learn that needing closeness leads to disappointment, so the safest strategy is to need less. Not to stop wanting connection entirely, that need never actually disappears, but to suppress the expression of it so thoroughly that eventually the person themselves starts to believe they don't need much from anyone. This is not a personality trait. It is a survival adaptation that worked exactly as intended in childhood and then gets carried, largely unexamined, into every adult relationship that follows. Now here is where it gets specifically relevant to what you are experiencing. When an avoidantly attached adult starts to feel real closeness with someone, something counterintuitive happens in their nervous system. The closeness itself, the very thing that should feel good, triggers an alarm response because on some pre-verbal level, closeness has historically been associated with eventual disappointment or engulfment. This is measurable, by the way. Attachment researchers using physiological monitoring have found that avoidantly attached individuals show increased stress hormone activity specifically during moments of emotional intimacy with a partner, even when they report the interaction as positive. Their body is treating closeness as a threat while their conscious mind is genuinely enjoying the relationship. Those two things happening simultaneously is exactly why the withdrawal is so confusing from the outside. It looks like someone retreating from something they don't want. It is actually someone's nervous system trying to create distance from something it doesn't yet know how to tolerate wanting. This is the part that changes everything. Once you actually absorb it, the withdrawal is not proportional to how little they care. It is frequently proportional to how much the closeness registered as significant. A shallow, low-stakes interaction rarely triggers this response because there is nothing to protect against. It is specifically the moments of real emotional exposure, the vulnerable conversation, the unguarded weekend, the instance where you both dropped the performance and just existed together honestly, that activate the pattern. Which means, in a strange and almost unfair twist, the withdrawal you are experiencing might actually be evidence that the relationship is working, not evidence that it is failing. I want to walk through what this cycle actually looks like in real time because recognizing it in the moment is the whole point. Phase 1 is closeness. Genuine intimacy, emotional or physical, that exceeds the avoidant person's baseline comfort level. This feels good in the moment, often surprisingly good, which is part of what makes the next phase so disorienting. Phase 2 is the alarm. Within hours to a few days, the avoidant partner starts to feel an unnamed unease, a sense of being too exposed, too known, too invested, without necessarily being able to articulate any of that even to themselves. Phase 3 is the retreat. This is the visible part, the part the other partner actually experiences. Reduced communication, increased focus on work or other obligations, subtle emotional flatness, sometimes even minor irritability that has nothing to do with anything the other person actually did. Phase 4, and this is the part almost nobody talks about, is the return. If the relationship has any real foundation, and if the other partner doesn't escalate in a way that confirms the avoidant person's fear of engulfment, the retreat typically self-resolves. The avoidant partner re-engages, often without ever naming what happened. Sometimes even more warmly than before, because some part of the nervous system has processed the closeness and determined it survivable. The tragedy, and I don't use that word lightly, is that most relationships don't make it to phase 4 because phase 3 gets misread as a verdict rather than a phase. The partner experiencing the withdrawal typically responds in one of two ways, and both of them make things measurably worse. The first is escalation, more texts, more requests for reassurance, more direct questions about where things stand, more visible anxiety. To an avoidant nervous system already in alarm mode, this escalation reads as exactly the kind of engulfment it was trying to protect against. So the withdrawal deepens rather than resolves. The second common response is premature exit, deciding based on the withdrawal alone that the person clearly isn't interested, and ending things before phase 4 ever has a chance to occur. Both responses are completely understandable. Neither one is wrong to feel, but both of them tend to end relationships at the exact moment they were becoming real, based on a misreading of what the withdrawal actually meant. So how do you actually tell the difference between an avoidant withdrawal cycle, which resolves, and someone who is genuinely losing interest, which doesn't? There are a few reliable distinctions. Timing is the first and most important one. Avoidant withdrawal almost always follows a specific, identifiable moment of increased closeness. If you can point to the exact conversation, event, or shift that preceded the distance, that is a strong signal you are looking at the cycle rather than a genuine loss of interest, which tends to be gradual and unrelated to any specific intimacy trigger. Duration is the second cycle-based withdrawal typically resolves within a window of a few days to roughly 2 weeks. If the distance stretches well beyond that with no re-engagement whatsoever, and especially if new avoidant behaviors keep appearing rather than the original pattern resolving, that is a different and more concerning signal. The third distinction is what happens during the withdrawal itself. Someone in an avoidant cycle is usually still doing small, low-effort things that indicate continued attachment, viewing your stories, liking a post, a short but not cold response, even while being distant in deeper communication. Someone who has genuinely lost interest tends to disengage across every channel simultaneously, not just the deep ones. Now, understanding this pattern does not mean you are required to simply wait patiently every single time it happens. And I want to be really clear about that because there is a version of this advice that gets weaponized to keep people in relationships that genuinely aren't working. Recognizing the cycle is not the same thing as excusing indefinite emotional unavailability. A person can absolutely have avoidant patterns and still be capable of doing the work to change them. And a person can also use avoidant attachment as a permanent excuse to never show up for a partner. The difference between those two people is whether the cycle actually resolves over time, whether the periods of retreat get shorter and less frequent as trust builds, and whether they're willing to even acknowledge the pattern exists when you name it calmly. If a partner refuses to engage with the topic at all, denies that any pattern exists despite clear repeated evidence, or if the withdrawal periods are getting longer rather than shorter as the relationship continues, that is not an avoidant attachment cycle anymore. That is simply unavailability, and no amount of understanding the psychology behind it should be used to talk yourself into tolerating something that isn't actually improving. Here is what to actually do the next time you notice this pattern beginning. First, Resist the urge to interpret the withdrawal in the moment it is happening. Give it space before you draw conclusions, specifically because the meaning of the behavior often only becomes clear in hindsight, once you see whether phase 4 occurs. Second, maintain your own baseline of warmth without escalating. This means continuing to show up as yourself, not performing coldness back at them to protect your ego, and also not chasing with increased intensity to force a resolution. Simple, low-pressure consistency is the single most effective response to this cycle because it gives the avoidant nervous system evidence that closeness didn't lead to the engulfment or abandonment it was braced for. Third, once the cycle resolves and things feel warm again, that is the actual window to name the pattern calmly and without blame. Something as simple as "I noticed you tended to pull back a bit after we got close, and I wanted to understand what that is like for you," opens a door that confrontation during the withdrawal itself almost never opens. The larger lesson underneath all of this is that closeness is not always experienced as safety by the people we're closest to, even when they want the relationship as much as we do. Learning to recognize the difference between someone protecting themselves from something that matters and someone genuinely stepping away from something that doesn't is one of the most valuable skills you can build in any relationship, romantic or otherwise, because it changes confusion into clarity, and clarity is what actually lets you decide, with real information instead of anxiety, whether a relationship is worth continuing to build. I want to spend a little more time on the physiological research behind this, because I think the concreteness of it actually helps people trust the explanation instead of dismissing it as pop psychology. Studies using heart rate monitoring and cortisol sampling during couples' conversations have repeatedly found something that surprises most people the first time they hear it. Avoidantly attached individuals frequently show elevated physiological stress markers during conversations specifically about closeness, commitment, or emotional needs, even when they report, verbally and consciously, that the interaction felt fine or even positive. Their body is registering a threat signal that their conscious mind isn't picking up on at all. This gap between conscious experience and physiological response is exactly why avoidant withdrawal so often looks, from the partner's perspective, like it is coming out of nowhere. The avoidant person themselves frequently doesn't have conscious access to why they suddenly feel the urge to create distance. They just feel it, act on it, and often only make sense of it afterward, if at all. This has an important implication that is worth sitting with, because it reframes something that gets misunderstood constantly in this dynamic. When an avoidant partner is asked directly, in the moment of withdrawing, why they're pulling away, they frequently cannot give an honest, coherent answer. Not because they're being evasive or dishonest, but because the withdrawal is happening faster and deeper than their conscious narrative can track. This is why direct confrontation in the moment of withdrawal so often produces answers that feel unsatisfying or even contradictory. Things like, "I don't know, I just need space," or "nothing's wrong, I am just tired," answers that can feel like they're hiding something when they're often simply the most honest access the person has to what is actually a largely unconscious process. Let's also talk about a specific variation of this cycle that catches a lot of people off guard because it doesn't match the typical pattern of gradual withdrawal after a single moment of closeness. Some avoidant individuals experience what is sometimes called a deactivation cascade, where a series of small, individually minor moments of closeness accumulate without triggering withdrawal until a threshold is crossed, at which point the response looks disproportionate to whatever the most recent, immediate interaction was. This is why partners often report being blindsided by a withdrawal that seems to follow directly from something completely ordinary, a normal weekend, an unremarkable conversation, when in fact the withdrawal was building for weeks based on an accumulation of closeness that finally exceeded what the avoidant partner's system could tolerate without needing to create distance. Understanding this variation matters because it means you shouldn't only look at the most recent interaction when trying to understand a withdrawal. Sometimes the actual trigger is the cumulative weight of an extended period of closeness rather than any single event. I also want to address something that comes up often in response to this kind of explanation, which is a reasonable concern that understanding the psychology behind avoidant withdrawal risks becoming an excuse that lets a partner off the hook indefinitely for behavior that is genuinely difficult to be on the receiving end of. This concern deserves to be taken seriously rather than dismissed. Understanding a mechanism is not the same thing as being obligated to tolerate it without limit or without any expectation of growth. A partner who understands their own avoidant pattern and is actively working to communicate through it, even imperfectly, is in a fundamentally different position than a partner who uses the language of attachment theory purely to explain away behavior they have no intention of examining or changing. The explanatory framework is meant to help you interpret behavior accurately, not to talk yourself into accepting a dynamic that isn't actually moving in a healthier direction over time. If you find yourself repeatedly using this explanation to justify staying in a situation that isn't improving despite real, sustained effort on your part to communicate your needs clearly, that is worth examining honestly, separate from whether the underlying psychological explanation is accurate. There is also a version of this pattern worth naming that shows up specifically in longer relationships, sometimes years in, where the withdrawal cycle has become so familiar to both partners that it has stopped generating active crisis and has instead settled into something closer to a low background. Both partners simply accustomed to the rhythm of closeness, followed by retreat, followed by return, without either partner actively working to shrink the amplitude of that cycle over time. This can look from the outside like a stable relationship, because neither person is in acute distress about it anymore. But stability built entirely around accommodation to a cycle is different from stability built around actually resolving the underlying pattern. And the difference matters, because relationships that settle into the former tend to feel, over the long run, like something is quietly missing, even when nothing is dramatically wrong, while relationships that do the work to genuinely shift the pattern tend to develop a level of closeness and trust that the accommodated version never quite reaches. This grounding also changes how the avoidant partner experiences you, because a partner who feels settled and whole outside the relationship reads, on some unconscious level, as less likely to be engulfing, which is often exactly the quality that makes an avoidant partner feel safe enough to stay present rather than retreat. One last practical thought before we close this out. If you are the partner on the receiving end of this cycle, it is worth building your own sense of stability that doesn't depend entirely on the current state of the relationship in any given week. This isn't about emotionally detaching or protecting yourself by caring less. It is about having enough of your own life, your own friendships, your own sense of identity outside the relationship that a withdrawal phase doesn't threaten your entire sense of security the way it might if the relationship were the only source of stability in your life. Partners who have this kind of grounding tend to navigate the withdrawal cycle with far less anxiety, not because they care less, but because their own well-being isn't entirely contingent on the avoidant partner's current phase of the cycle, which paradoxically makes it easier to respond with the calm consistency that actually helps the cycle resolve. If this explained a pattern you've lived through, you are not alone in it. This dynamic plays out in an enormous number of relationships that otherwise look completely different from each other on the surface, and there's a lot more where this came from. Subscribe to Heartnest, because next week we're covering exactly what secure attachment looks like day to day, so you have something concrete and specific to compare this pattern to, and something clear to actually work toward once you've recognized it in your own relationship.